your reassuring voice that Jesus is Lord. Psalm 92 leads us in this week's discussion of purposeful fruit from our lives. Now, this has been a long-term theme of mine. You are either primarily a consumer or a producer. You're one or the other. Now, of course, producers consume and consumers produce, but noteworthily, you are bent toward one or the other. You are a consumer or you are a producer. The psalm calls us not to consume primarily, but to produce. And it challenges the Western notion of a season of life where we stop producing called retirement. Now, people adjust what they produce in retirement. People adjust the demands on their productivity in retirement. People adjust all kinds of things. I'm not here to talk about that, but I am here to talk about pushing in the clutch and putting your car in neutral. You do not want your life in neutral on productivity as a Christian. You will still bear fruit. So maybe you've gone through a disease. Well, you can still bear fruit. Maybe you've gone through a divorce. You can still bear fruit. Maybe you have sinned beyond the sin you ever thought you would sin. You can still bear fruit. I like the line, will still bear fruit. Now, in that particular psalm, it's talking about in old age. I don't know what old age is. Some of my friends are in their 90s and they're still bearing fruit and don't appear to be in old age. Others are 18 and they already act like they're 212. But nonetheless, still bear fruit. My concept from Psalm 92 for us in this week is that bearing fruit is the product of intentionality. The intentionality of bearing fruit. An illustration I've used in my own thinking is I would tell Jonathan, let's say, clean your room. When I come home today, I want your room cleaned. Then when I came home, this is a story, it's not accurate or true, but I came home, he said, Dad, I mowed the lawn. Well, that's a great productivity. It just wasn't the one that was designed. It wasn't the one that was requested. And so I think some of us, when we stand before the Lord, we will say, look what I did with the money, God. I gained 8,000% on the money that you gave me. And he says, great. However, your assignment was to win the lost. Or let's say you win 1,000 people to Christ and you get before the Lord and he goes, that's great. Except the assignment was discipleship. And so my line for me is, can't lead your life or somebody else will, right? So as you lead your life and you decide what intentional fruit you want to bear, you begin to make ready the requirements or the maybe credentials you need for that. If, for example, you want to be a doctor, you need to go to med school, right? If you want to be productive in this season of your life in Thai, then you got to learn Thai. If you want to be effective in this season in helping the poor, then you have to be willing to yourself become poor, right? That was one of the biggest challenges of my life as I was preparing to launch my second curve. I remember being with Paula at a chemotherapy treatment, and I heard the Lord say to me, or ask me a question, would you be willing to go through cancer if it's the only way that these chemotherapy patients would hear the gospel? I was like, oh. And then at another time, would I be willing to live in poverty if that's what's necessary to be productive among the poor? And so we began to make changes that our lives could be productive in this season. I don't remember who I heard this from, but maybe 20 years ago, I think it was Bob Buford. He wrote the book Halftime. He was a billionaire that allowed me to come and sit with them for 4 or 5 days in Colorado Springs and learn. I think he's the one that I heard it from. He said, when you're planning the next thing in your life, you have an intentional midlife crisis. What he meant was this line: He said, you open your life suitcase and you take out everything that you needed for the first part of the journey. And you only put back in your suitcase what you need for the next part of your journey. So we begin to unpack the life suitcase and repack for the second curve, in my terms. And so, intentional fruit bearing. Well, Psalm 92, I think, gives us some guidelines on the intentionality that we want to have, and predominantly advice on the philosophy we want to take as we unpack and repack, that we will be productive in every stage of our lives. Just for example, one of the things you have to unpack, that we all have to not have in our suitcase, is bitterness. You cannot go forward if you're bitter. You cannot move forward in God if you're staying in a place of woundedness. So we open, I got something on my eye there, sorry. We open, there we go. We open our suitcase and we repack it with only the fruit of the Spirit for this part of the journey. Anyway, Psalm 92. It says you have three options: grass, palm tree, or cedar. So as you sit there and think with me today about the intentional productivity you want from your life in this season, the fruitfulness you want in your life. Jonathan Gainsborough, let me throw down one of your lines. Remember to have rootedness before fruitfulness. But nonetheless, you decide, are you going to be grass, which withers and fades? Are you going to be a palm tree, which is green 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? It is always a palm tree, and it is always green, unless it has a disease or something, but you know what I'm saying. And the palm tree bears various kinds of fruit, like palm dates, from which in Israel at least they make the greatest of honeys. Woo, that's good honey. So grass or a palm tree, it's green 24/7, 365. Or a cedar, which takes centuries to grow. Cedar, and doesn't take centuries to grow, but to become a large, expansive cedar, it takes centuries to grow. And so in this season of your life, as you think about the intentional productivity that you are deciding you want out of your life in this season, I ask that you would consider what in your life is producing grass that withers, what will simply fade away, what produces a palm tree that will be green 24/7, 365, and what will produce a long growing cedar tree. A cedar tree that will be effective in its productivity for hundreds and hundreds of years. Nonetheless, as we consider our productivity, I realize that there are dangerous curves ahead in a second curve. When you plan your second curve, there's often a leaving of parts of the first curve, which can set you off in this sort of wonderland, in a place that you've not been before, and the temptations of that can be significant. I wasn't expecting the challenges spiritually, emotionally, of the second curve. I was expecting some, but it was far different and bigger than I expected. So, as you unpack your suitcase and repack for what it is you will be productive in the days ahead, I encourage you to consider, what in my suitcase is grass? And what can I put in my suitcase that will produce a palm tree and produce a long-term